Welcome to Fated Evidence, unraveling the past one clue at a time, with your host, retired detective captain and private investigator, Vince Wallis.
Hello and welcome to Fated Evidence. Today I'd like to take a minute and summarize the Bernhardt case with a very brief overview of the case, methods, and tools used to solve this case. With me today are Monty Wallis and Scott Goodwin. Both have appeared on prior podcasts with me, and both are active in the cold case unit to this day. So I'd like to welcome you both here today and for joining me again. I know both of you have been on here at points in time. So
thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you coming out. Let's like to kind of go over maybe some broad strokes on the Bernhardt case and, some of the methods that we use to solve the case, some of the tools, just kind of broad strokes with it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Good with that?
Yeah, you bet.
All right. One of the things I wanted to kind of cover, I believe in a couple of the other ones that we had done, I think we've done 2 on Bernhardt. We did talk a little bit about the evidence left at the scene, which was, some male biological fluid. And then we had some cigarette butts that were found in the DNA from both of those, from the cigarette butts and the fluid were the same. Did you guys have anything to add with that? I mean, any thoughts on that? Or?
I think one of the things about that case that was interesting was the killer took a lot of time to clean up the scene and was there for a substantial amount of time. That's unusual in a case where you have a double homicide. Normally it's just in and out. And in this particular case, that person stayed there and was meticulous and worked hard to clean up the scene. He didn't clean up everything he should have, but back then DNA was not a factor, so that wasn't something he was looking at. But in this particular case, it was unusual for somebody to be there that long.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing too. I mean, obviously there was no hurry in anything.
No.
And but yeah, I think that's good. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Well, it was also very unusual that because they had just moved in the process of moving into the home in October, the suspect was very brazen in that people had access from the outside of the home, seeing into the home. That was very, very unusual. And he stayed there for a very long amount of time compared to the average offender who wants to get in and get out and to remain free. He doesn't want to be caught in there. The other thing is that, as we know, he took something with him when he left. And if he had been stopped on a traffic stop, that was another very, very brazen thing for this offender to do.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of risk taken on behalf of the suspect for sure. I mean, all good points. As far as the thermostat being turned down and everything, all things you don't normally see in, a lot of homicides.
Well, it certainly shows premeditation.
Yes.
He had a game plan when he went in there.
Yes.
And as it developed, he pretty much, it looks like, followed that plan.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why the case went unsolved for so many years.
Right. And I think it also shows this is one of those cases where this is a combination of a sophisticated and an unsophisticated offender.
Right.
He made some mistakes that, ended up kind of being his downfall. But he was also, I hate to use the word smart, but smart enough to try to alter the time of death based on decomposition and so forth, with the opening of all the windows on a very, very cold November night, the setting of the lowest temperature on the thermostat, all of those things that we know. And yet he seemingly had some unprepared moments too, where he improvised. But he had a mission, and he was obsessed, we believe, with what he was going to do, and he just stayed there longer than you will normally see in one of these kind of cases.
Well, the other thing too is that this was what we call a one-hit wonder. We have no evidence that he had killed previously. And for him to have that level of sophistication, I think, is unusual. This was something he thought about for a long time, and he was able to put that plan into play. And without any previous experience, apparently, he was able to go in and kill 2 people and walk away free for many years.
Yeah, man, obviously, we know that they were coworkers, so that probably played in with some of the planning and or some of the things that went into this.
Well, and as we discussed in a prior episode, the name of the case was entitled by Monty, the hiding in plain sight, because this person went home after murdering 2 people, and he stayed there until he died. He didn't leave town. He didn't run out of town. He stayed here. I mean, again, there's a brazenness to this person. That's an extremely unusual set of circumstances. And this guy was never found, like Monty said, to be involved in any other crimes that we could prove or find or see.
Right.
So he just went about his day smiling at everybody. He was referred to as a very kindly guy on his obituary. And he was anything but the sort. It's, again, the guy that hides behind that facade of normalcy. He was quite literally hiding in plain sight.
I do want to take a minute to acknowledge the detectives and investigators, deputies, whoever that was on the scene in 1973, because the evidence handling, packaging, storage, etc., was obviously good enough that 40, 45, 44 years later, actually, starting in what was it 2004 or 94 that the first STR profile came out in that.
Well, 2004, I think, was when the original big step forward with DNA came in that particular case.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, definitely an acknowledgement to the detectives and deputies that were on scene that packaged that and put those together.
They did a great job. They were able to go over that crime scene, look for anything possible.
Yeah.
They collected evidence correctly. They stored it correctly. And it was brought back and put into storage in our evidence building. And I think we had at least 1 or 2 moves of evidence over the years, and they survived that and maintained their integrity. So they did a great job.
Well investigated. I mean, back in 73, when you had a homicide, it was real detective work back then. I mean, you didn't have DNA, you had blood type.
They were looking for fingerprints mainly.
Yep, that was the other part of it, which is something that we'll talk about because obviously, we looked at fingerprints in this case as being a possibility with new technology in that aspect as well. And, it was a no-go, which is, part of it. Not a lot of crimes are solved with fingerprints. There are some, don't get me wrong, but not a huge amount.
Well, if you can find the weapon used to kill somebody, that's normally where fingerprints come in most cases. In this particular case, that wasn't the way it worked.
Yeah. So evidence handling, packaging, storage, all by those guys were excellent at the time and definitely contributed to the completion of this case for sure. Yeah. We talked about fingerprints a little bit. It is what it is. I know the FBI had, or at some point in the last 10 to 12 years, has upped their game as far as with cold cases and such. Do you guys remember that? Yeah,
we received word that the FBI was going to go through their fingerprint files and look for additional evidence. They were going to try to clean up the files and come back with anything that might help agencies around the country solve some of these crimes. And really, that's the last I heard about that particular effort. I don't know how far they've gotten. I know it would be a time-consuming thing, so maybe they're still at it, but it would be good to know where that stands.
I mean, I think they just opened it up to where, hey, listen, if you got cold cases and fingerprints, send it to us. I think that's more of what it was than anything, but I don't know. I don't remember. I remember seeing it cross my desk, but I do know that, we did consult with them on this.
I think they had other problems.
It also shows the difference between comparably fingerprints and DNA.
Correct.
Fingerprints, in theory, you can argue about it all day long, that if they knew the person, they had a relationship with the suspect, well, yeah, my fingerprints are in there, so what? That's different from male biological material DNA, the absolute gold standard. Again, you can even extrapolate that from a criminal defense lawyer's point of view and saying, oh, we had a consensual relationship. That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, that is a whole different thing, which is something that, was highly considered in this case. But once you get really down to the nuts and bolts of this and timeframes, this is where timelines become such an issue, an important issue, when you start looking at the timeline and the time frame, and then some specifics as far as male biological fluid and the breakdown and all of that kind of stuff, then you can start to pinpoint the time frame a little bit better, and it's kind of hard to get out of that.
Interesting thing about this case was the number of people that were interviewed and considered over the years. Hundreds. They had friends. They had more friends than most people. Yeah. They had coworkers. A major source of suspects, of course, at the coworkers. Point of view, Ryan Grocery and Quality Concrete. So there were a lot of people that were considered in this particular case over the years.
I mean, it was kind of rough when I first grabbed it because it seemed to me that circle was very large, but also a lot of them were related by marriage. I mean, there was just
a lot of family.
Either they worked together and they were relatives, like in-laws. I mean, it's like sisters were married to, people that Clifford worked with, and things like that. And it didn't muddy the waters or anything. It just, it was very interesting because then it made that circle bigger and bigger.
More people to eliminate.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, no, that's why there was 8 binders.
Right. And all the different working theories, the possibility, looking for that nexus of why would they have contact where there's seemingly, as you guys would put it, no forced entry. Right. This person was allowed into the home. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that tell you? What do you take from that? What do you extrapolate from that? Well, family member, coworker, neighbor,
right?
Religious connotation.
I mean, nobody was off the table when we looked at this. I mean, they really couldn't be because the detectives in 1973 and throughout the time that this case was investigated, they investigated it very well. I mean, when we got it, it really was a whodunit. Yes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It wasn't like, hey, there's this person of interest to this person. It was a whodunit.
Yes.
So that did make it interesting.
There were times over the years when we were looking at this case every day where it almost seemed overwhelming.
Yes.
We'd have lists of people that we were going to talk to and eliminate and find out where they were, take a look at their timeline, see what they remembered.
And we did.
We did. We interviewed every one of those people.
Yeah. There was a lot of buccal swabs obtained in this just for the simple reason that it was such a whodunit and, the case had been investigated very well from the beginning.
One thing I've always wanted to do is thank those people who cooperated with us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's to their credit that they said, sure, let me come down and talk to you. I'll tell you what I know.
Yep.
Yes.
And when they were asked for a buccal swab, they said, certainly, anything we could do to help solve the case, greatly appreciated.
A lot of them were coworkers. I mean, obviously, because we're looking closely, with the profile that had been done by Douglas and Cooper and the Cold Case Foundation. I mean, they were like, look close, and we were.
Yes.
But you have some limitations with death and no biological children in there.
Yes. Well, and the word, Captain, that they had used on that profile was very close.
Mm-hmm.
That was an issue, and it's the same as this thing of looking at juries where the prosecution is not charged with proving the motive behind the murders, and yet human nature is people want to know why they do. They want to know why.
Right.
This was a situation where we had several different theories on motive and whatnot, but it really boiled down to hard, direct, physical evidence.
You know, it was interesting
Period.
that you said very close, and we took that to mean a couple different things. I remember this because we sat down and met, and it was like, you know, there's a couple different connotations to that. Is it geographically close?
Yes.
Or is it close as in a circle of friends, a
Yes.
family,
Or all of the above.
or all of the above?
Yes.
And we looked at all of the above. Actually, we did go through the neighbors. We went through violent offenders at the time. We went through people that had criminal histories that lived in the area at the time. We went through everybody. I mean, that was close and very close in all those realms.
Including the family that lived 100 feet, 150 feet away.
Right.
The other home,
Yep.
other family members.
Yep.
And we would have to have an 8-hour podcast to go through some of the issues that we ran into
Right.
on that home, on some of the family members, some of the issues that come up. And I think for your audience that are interested in this whole working theory on cold case, this would be the prime case to let people look in on, because
Right.
there were, I think Monty counted 212 times where we were very excited because we knew, air quotes, knew who did it and why. Well, we were wrong 212 times.
Well, it shows the system works.
Yeah.
I mean, when you take a look at this case and the number of people that were interviewed, number of people talked to, number of people considered persons of interest, to narrow it down to one person, that's a process, and
Yeah.
the process works.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it is, I mean, yeah, I think that sums it up very well. I mean, it's, you know, you know when you got the right guy. You know, I can only say that. I mean, you know when you got the right person. The thing about cold cases that I've, you know, felt and observed, I guess, is the one step forward and the 3 or 4 steps back.
Yes.
That's a common thing. And, you know, it's not unusual. I think it happens in pretty much every case, but,
Yes.
I have another saying that I'd like to use: one day of sunlight and 1,000 days of darkness.
that's a pretty big ratio there.
Well, it's at times it seems that way.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, you know, and if you look at the vast amount of information and people involved in this case, we're going to have days where there's going to be, you know, one step forward and several back.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you're waiting on the lab for, you know, 6 months or 8 months for, you know, stuff to come back.
Or longer.
You
Yeah.
know, I do have to say that the state crime lab did very well for us. I mean, we did send them a lot of buccal swabs that they added to this case without any argument from them or anything. I mean, they were just as involved as we were by the end.
We used a lot of favors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is what they do, but they were just as much wanting this solved as we were.
Yeah, and they did help us immensely, and they were always there when we needed them. And probably they didn't get as much credit in solving this case as they should have.
Yeah. And, you know, and the other thing is, you know, bouncing questions off of attorneys at the county attorney's office. I mean, that's obviously very helpful. You know, meeting with, you know, Scott Twido and everybody on these cases. I mean, that's all beneficial for us in, you know, what they want, what they can use and what they can't. So, you know, having a good basis legally when you're looking at cold cases is a huge deal. And they were very supportive and helpful with this as well.
It certainly is a team effort.
It really is on so many aspects, you know, from the attorneys, the investigators, the volunteers, the different labs that were used, the scientists, and, you know, all of the service assists that we asked for in this. I mean,
Well, just as a recap for members of your audience that hadn't heard a previous podcast, we had 21 separate law enforcement agencies in 12 states of the union that assisted us
right.
in this case. And regarding Monty's point, we cleared 80 men via buccal swabs that proved conclusively that they, and many times we were excited because we thought this was it. And 80 men were cleared. We had 3 men that chose not to cooperate. That's their right. So then it ended up with our closely related family members that were ended up being our suspect. The other thing I wanted to highlight too is that really we also had a captain, Vince Wallis, and a sheriff, Mike Linder, that were totally supportive of this whole thing.
That's a great point, because if
Yep.
Sheriff Linder had not
Yep.
started the cold case unit when he did, this case probably would have never been solved.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and you know, it's good to acknowledge that for sure, because you know, it was continued support as well. It wasn't, you know, just his brainchild of having the unit start. It was
Yep.
the support and involvement in the cold case unit, and even to this day,
Yeah.
Yes.
that is still occurring.
He is there working with us and helping us
Yep.
and giving us his opinion and expertise, and we greatly appreciate
Yeah,
that.
he wants these solved just as bad as you know, any of us.
One truism, I think, is that cases that don't get worked don't get solved.
Right.
And most cold cases, because of the press of regular business, the number of new cases coming in every day, cold cases get shoved off to the side,
Yep.
unless there's a group of people in a division that are there pushing those cases and saying, hey, look what we found. Here's a new piece of information. Here's something detectives should look at. That's really a key to keeping these cases alive throughout the years.
Very important.
And it's a rarity. It takes a large agency, Los Angeles Police Department, San Francisco Police Department, New York City Police Department, that have real, full, huge command cold case units. Well, the overwhelming majority of agencies are small to mid-sized agencies, so it's
Right.
difficult.
Yep.
And I don't work for you anymore, so you can't fire me. But I can say that you drove this thing. What was the key thing that changed this case, Captain? IGG, investigative genetic genealogy.
Right.
And that's when we really began the final step in this march to close this case.
I know that we had talked on a previous podcast with about the behind the scenes. That was the episode developing a cold case unit, and you bring up, you know, LAPD, LA County. There was, you know, points and times when I had some conversations with Lieutenant, I think it's Dave Coleman out of LASO. Very helpful in their homicide division. We talked a lot about cold cases there and cold cases in general, and he was very helpful in, you know, providing us with the process we use to classify these cases and such, and put them in an order, and some software that, you know, helped at one point in time too. So yeah, he was another beneficial person that helped a bunch with this.
Got a lot of advice from a lot of good people over the years.
Yeah.
That certainly helped us and helped get us off to a fast start.
What do you gentlemen think were the turning points in this investigation?
I don't recall if this was common knowledge, public knowledge, but the
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't think that's really been out there that much, but yeah, I mean,
it was just the compilation of everything that we could find genetically, DNA wise, along with every bit of physical evidence that we could put together. You want to just get this stuff out of the realm of whodunit,
right.
the Sherlock Holmes theory, which you can just take you off completely off track compared to physical direct evidence.
Yeah.
It's the science.
It's the science.
I think you're talking, Scott, about the biological fluid matching the DNA in the cigarette butts.
Correct.
Yeah. No, so I mean, yeah, that tied in a lot of things. It's one thing to have male biological fluid there. It's another thing to have other items that, you know, DNA matched as well.
Corroborates it.
It corroborates, you know, the scene, a lot of different things. So yeah, no, I think that's. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's the DNA aspect of it that has changed this case and so many others. And it dates back before we even started the cold case unit, when Lieutenant Wilson was working the case. This case was a big deal to him. I remember
Yes.
going into his office one day, and he had a pile of evidence on his desk from this case.
Yeah.
And we talked about it, and he said, I'm I'm still looking. There's evidence here. I know we can find DNA. I know there's a way to solve this case. And his initial efforts led to the initial findings of DNA evidence that eventually, many years later, brought us to an end.
I think for myself, and I totally agree with you, the turning point in this investigation was the technology. When genetic genealogy popped, I think that it was a huge step. The initial part of that was the phenotyping. I think once we had the phenotyping done and we had an eye color of our suspect, then we took everybody with dark eyes and put them at the bottom of the stack. We didn't take them off the table, but we put them at the bottom.
Right.
And I felt like that was a big turning point for us at that point.
Right.
And then, keeping up on the technology, not long after that, a few years, we were into GG, genetic genealogy. And I felt like, that was another major turning point in this case.
Well, it was interesting to watch that side of it develop.
Correct.
I remember looking on television one day and seeing an ad from one of the genealogy companies saying, send us your DNA and we'll tell you who your relatives are. And we all looked at that and said, wow, if we can use DNA for that, we can use DNA to solve some of these crimes. So as that developed and as genealogy came into its full glory, certainly opened up all the doors that you see today, solving hundreds of cases across the country.
Right.
And I know we covered this before. I think we covered it before, but it takes us on this linear path to the Angie Dodge case in Idaho Falls, Idaho, which was one of the first times where this became a major deal through 23andMe, and it turned into a legal issue, and they had found informational through a kinship testing, and that kind of sparked the whole thing. And as we've discussed before, we were one of the very, very, very first major Parabon Nanolabs cases, and kind of in a foot race with the Golden State Killer. We've covered this before, but it has changed the world of solving homicides, specifically cold cases.
Yep.
It's life-changing. And the other thing I could kind of prove it with is the calls that Monty, who founded this unit and still is a coordinator for the unit, gets calls from family members saying, kind of for good or for bad, hey, I see you're solving cases, and what about my case? Understandably.
Right.
Well, we can't share everything that we know or don't know, but it comes back to specifically DNA evidence.
Right.
Very hard to do without. Matter of fact, very difficult.
Well, that brings up a good point too, and that is that not every case can be solved with DNA. Unfortunately, there are cases where a good DNA sample cannot be found. There are cases where the DNA has degraded over the years, and you don't have enough DNA to really get a good sample. All of those things occur, even on cases that you see nationally. If you take a look at the John Benet Ramsey case and others where they're still searching for good DNA. So one of the things we tell families in many cases is we're looking for the DNA that might help solve this case. We haven't found it yet, but that doesn't mean we're not still looking for it.
Right. Yeah. The way DNA has evolved has definitely been a game changer for, not only this case and other cases that we have, but all around the country, as mentioned. It's important that investigators keep up on that. I remember when I first found out about GG, and we were kind of in a race with the Golden State Killer. We were monitoring that pretty close.
Yep.
And because there was some similarities in there for sure. And so, it was very important that we kept up on that. And I remember when we got a hold of Parabon and then ended up, talking with CC more. And then there was another assistant that she used at the time. Who was it?
Christine Green.
They both assisted on this case too, so they definitely need to be recognized as well. They were the ones that came up with our names for us, and we finished it off with some YSTR testing, but here we are.
And this is ironic. Going back, you and I fielded a phone call one day from a very credible man in the old sheriff's office building, and who was laying out for us that we may very well have the same suspect as the EAR, and we were like, EAR, the East Area Rapist, which was the genesis of the Golden State Killer. Right. He was indeed the Golden State Killer.
That was him.
And this guy was very credible, and we received a lot of information from people that, let's just charitably say, weren't quite as credible. But this gentleman really had our attention. But it just shows you this genesis, this nucleus of where this all came from. The other thing I would just want to throw out is that we can't. The technology has exponentially, changed just overnight, over and over, replicating. It's replicating, right? But we really can't, in good conscience, tell families, "Oh, just be patient." Well, they've waited in some cases 40, 50 years. We just saw 2 cases solved from Honolulu cases from 1977. And the reason that we would want to kind of cover this is that the technology of wherever we are now, January of 2025, I promise you, 2 years from today, January 2027 will be there. It's just changing every single day. And with the reason I bring this up is AI. AI, in my opinion, is going to be massively involved in cold cases over the next 5 years.
It'll be interesting to see. We'll on the program we'll interview some genetic genealogy people and some other scientists and kind of see what they think.
Yeah,
where this is headed, because it'll be interesting to see. Before we wrap up here a little bit, I do want to kind of cover some of the challenges of decades-old cases. One of the things that kind of blindsided us quite a bit was death in that case. It was 40-some years old when we got it, and a lot of people had passed away and things. So, I kind of wanted to go over that with you guys and see what your take was on that and any other kind of challenges that you guys felt we had working a case that old.
You certainly run into a lot of people over the years that have either moved, gone to another location, or passed away, or disappeared, and you can't find them. And part of the job is to search these people out, and if they're deceased, you need to know that. If they were a close part of the original investigation, you need to know that and who they talked to and who they were related to. It's really a puzzle to try to find these people sometimes. We found one gentleman that we thought was somebody we should talk to in Florida. And he had a particular name and a date of birth, and we sent detectives in to talk to him, and by gosh, it was the wrong guy.
I do remember this.
That happens.
I do remember
that. Happens
that.
more than you would like to hear, but at least, you were able to track it down.
He was still a worker there, if I remember right. He just wasn't the person that we thought.
Well, in this particular case, he'd never been to Montana.
Oh, I don't know if I remember that.
So we were able to eliminate him quickly.
And he had been a sheriff's deputy, but he had the same name and the same date of birth. Now, how could you possibly explain that? But that's what happened.
I mean, yeah, I don't remember that one happening, but little things like that. I mean, when you're going through things like this and it's that old.
And relationships change with people too.
Right.
People that, let's say a particular individual that did a crime was dating a particular person and stayed with that person for years, and then they split up. Their attitudes change about, oh yeah, I remember this guy and he told me this. So you're always looking for that type of information if it's out there.
Right. That's the huge thing. That's a great point if that can happen. The other side of this is that we had lost several members of law enforcement. Many, many, many of the deputies and detectives that worked specifically this case were gone. But I'm gonna bring back another one today, which was probably one of the biggest parts of this case, was a gentleman who was literally at death's door when you and I went to his home.
I do remember this.
And he ended up, and his wife were both at literally at death's door on the oxygen tubes and mask when we were there. And he died immediately thereafter. But he dropped a bombshell. He was a gentleman who was a tile layer and had contact with our killer. And he gave us a story that just absolutely, gathered our attention. And then he passed away.
Well, it fit one of the theories that we had going into that. To that interview, he kind of confirmed one of the theories that we had, and it really was just a theory at the time, but it did confirm that aspect of it.
Yep.
So, all right, yeah, that makes good sense. I do want to touch on, and I think we already have a little bit about the importance of collaboration with other agencies. I mean, we used a lot of service assists or agency assists in this case. Just for the fact that, well, how many states were there, Scott?
12 states, 21 agencies.
21 agencies. I mean, that would have been a lot of travel for some detectives in our unit.
And I don't think we had the budget for it.
No, it would have came from other areas in the investigations budget, but it was nice. And that is common for there to be agency or service assists between other agencies. I mean, it's a very common thing. It's not uncommon, but recognizing, them and that they did assist with this case is huge because, we did talk to quite a few sharp detectives around the country. I mean, there were some really sharp guys that helped us out, doing a favor for us, doing an interview, grabbing a buccal swab or, whatever it was. They were super good with helping us out.
And they still are. Matter of fact, we used another agency in the state of Washington just a week ago.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they were able to get us a buccal swab from an individual.
So I think, that's important. And most agencies are aware that they can do that. It's just to what extent, but you don't know until you call. And, they can do all sorts of stuff for us if requested. And just like we would do lots of things for them if they requested.
And you guys do have that common respect for each other that you do it. But I want to just say that you could also have a detective who goes through the motions, does it kind of grudgingly. We did not have that experience in Bernhardt. We had some superior detectives that totally got into it, had the information at hand when they did interviews, particularly an interview in interviews in both New Mexico and Arizona. They just did bang up work.
Right.
And they could have just
any of them could have sloughed it off.
Right.
No, they did some good interviews for us and sent us the recordings. And the last thing I think is the GG testing, and I think we did cover that. How we started with the phenotyping. We started obviously with an STR profile that had nothing in CODIS and or any suspect database.
Right. And
then obviously. We're trying to do direct comparisons with the buccal swabs that we were obtaining at the time. And then, that grew into phenotyping, which gave us eye color, which helped narrow the list of people down. And eventually, we hit the ability to do GG. And, obviously, CC Moore got involved and
the world changed.
Yeah. So
I have to throw one last thing out.
Please do.
And I'm sure we covered this before. Monty did, or we did. But the converse, the flip side of different agencies helping us and so forth, sophistication and whatnot. I won't say what state, I won't say where or who, but Monty spoke to a wonderful law enforcement person and asked this person to do a buccal swab on a person we had in mind. And he honestly, this is not a joke, he literally asked him kind of with surprise in his voice. He said, "You want me to swab his belt buckle?" I'm not joking.
Buccal, buckle, whatever.
So, it was a very small agency.
It was.
And this poor person probably had never done anything like that.
So I guess I'd forgotten about that, but that was this case. I do remember.
Oh, yes. Well, it does show the level of expertise varies across the country.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, you guys have anything else to add on this?
The future's bright when it comes to cold cases. The continuing changes, the upgrades in genealogy and DNA are making a major difference, and the floodgates are now open, and every week you see a case being solved through those means. So I think that's something that gives us real hope that other cases can be solved locally and nationally, and it's fun to watch it happen.
Yeah. There's a lot of them are being solved just strictly because of PG.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you going over that with me, and just kind of hitting the high points of how the case progressed and such. Anything else you guys like to add?
No, it's just an honor to do it. It's
Thanks
a privilege.
for having us.
It's a privilege.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Captain.
All right. Thank you, guys. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Any parties mentioned in whole or part of an investigation are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. All opinions given by the host are my own.